Song.
All right, so my name is Aundrey, as you can see, and I did my leadership presentation over Dean Smith. And we're going to start with some background. He was born in I can't say his name still, in Peoria, Kansas, in 1931, February 28th. His mother was a public school teacher, and his father was a high school basketball coach. Now, growing up, Coach Smith idolized his father. He studied how his father took command of the game, and he saw how his dad was a man that stood up for different rights. He wasn't necessarily somebody who would just take the back and let things slide. He was one to stand up for his ideals. His father actually fought for desegregation, and for the Kansas High School Championship in 1934, he implemented the first black player in the high school tournament. In college, Dean Smith was involved in that. Not in college, but before college, Dean Smith was involved in all kinds of athletics before he graduated high school. He was a football player, and he played QB, he was a pitcher in baseball, and he was a point guard in basketball. So everybody likes to point out that he was a real brainiac when he was young. He did all the cerebral positions, and he was really into mathematics when he was graduating. Then he earned an academic scholarship into Kansas, and he walked onto the team and was usually a reserve guard, but he wasn't part of the national championship team in 1952. Now, how many guys have you heard of Fog Allen? Anybody know who that is? Real old. Well, he was like one of the, I would say one of the, well, actually, I guess it's going to be the second famous coach from Kansas. He actually coached under James Naismith, the inventor of basketball. So as a reserve guard back to Dean Smith, he didn't really play that much, but he was always seen sitting next to Fog Allen and taking notes and trying to make sure he knew exactly what was going on. He was keeping up with statistics. He was just always attentive to what was going on, even though he wasn't actually involved in the game. After graduation, Dean Smith joined Kansas as an assistant coach under Fog Allen. Continued his. After a short stint as an assistant coach at Kansas and at the Air Force Academy, he finally came home, and he joined North Carolina in 1958 under another actually legendary coach for North Carolina, Frank McGuire. In 1961, he became the head coach and remained there until 1997. He started creating his own standard like his father. He wanted to make sure that people knew what ideals he stood for and that he knew his values were more important than any other thing, including winning. He spoke up against issues like integration, the death penalty, and even nuclear disarmament. Back in the 50s and 60s, that's what the whole Cold War and the Vietnam and everybody was kind of the duck and cover thing under your desk. He was also involved in many local protests. He was known to bring his players to church, and obviously back in the 50s, again, some people kind of frowned upon that. And he also was responsible for desegregating a local restaurant that was really like across the street from campus, and it was real big that they didn't want to, they didn't want to desegregate, but he would again bring players. And he started it actually when he first did it. It was a black theology student and a Catholic preacher. So he brought both of them in, to sit down, and hopefully, obviously, with their religion, they were trying to keep the peace type of thing. He wasn't trying to make too much of a violent statement, but he just wanted everybody just to be together. And he also signed the first black player to the scholarship at North Carolina. His name, I can't believe I forgot his name. Can we go to a video? I couldn't get it onto the...
You don't think
you can click it, yeah, I just couldn't get it.
Right, you can, there we go.
And this is just a little presentation, not a presentation, but a little intro into more of his basketball career before we start talking about it.
In the last minute of the last college basketball game of 1982, with Georgetown leading North Carolina 62-61, a moment as symbolic as it was historic suddenly unfolded at courtside. Dean Smith called a timeout, leaving everyone to wonder which of his two stars, James Worthy or Sam Perkins, would be anointed to take the last shot. Kneeling in the huddle, Smith told them, "I'd rather be in our shoes than theirs. We are going to determine who wins this game." For a guy who'd been to 6 Final Fours and never won the big one, who'd been hung in effigy and nearly fired, Smith now looked eerily calm, almost serene. He knew that everybody in the gym was expecting the ball to go to either Worthy or Perkins, so he figured they'd be covered, and this would leave his 19-year-old freshman, a skinny kid named Michael Jordan, free to take the first good shot. Earlier that year, Smith had scolded his young gunner, "Michael, if you can't pass, you can't play." By year's end, Jordan had learned the Carolina way, the patience, discipline, and teamwork that Smith had been preaching all his life. Now, as the huddle split, a gambling Smith loaded everything on the kid, telling him, "Knock it in, Michael." 15 seconds later, there was Jordan rising off the floor, and there was serene Dean looking quietly on as Jordan's shot went in, swishing shut the window on Smith's frustrated past, even as it opened yet another on the game's Jordanian future. If Smith was the world's best teacher of basketball, as John Wooden once said, Michael was his finest student, and their bond was emblematic of the kind that Smith forged with all his players, one so tight it suggested family. "Coach taught me the game," Jordan said. "He's like a second father to me." So by the time Smith retired in 1997, he was seen as far more than one of the most creative technicians and innovators in the game. He was first and foremost a teacher, and not just of basketball. Of all the most celebrated college coaches in history, none expressed as strong a sense of social justice as Dean Smith. Smith was always that rarest of birds, the activist coach, unafraid to ruffle feathers, alumni or otherwise. Smith once integrated a Chapel Hill restaurant by sitting down to eat with a black divinity student and local white preacher. He signed Charlie Scott to be the Tar Heels' first black scholarship player. More than once he took his players to Central Prison in Raleigh to scrimmage for the inmates and to see the sad human faces of the doomed on death row. Coach Smith would get right in the cells with the prisoners, one player recalled. "It gave us a visual impression of how lucky and blessed we are." On the way back, the bus was always silent. And they still talk about the day in Raleigh when, at a meeting with Governor Jim Hunt, Smith urged the end of the death penalty, pointing at the governor and his aides and saying to each of them, "You're a murderer, and you're a murderer," and then pointing to himself, adding, "And I'm a murderer. The death penalty makes us all murderers." Coaching between the lines was his job. Teaching beyond them was Smith's legacy. For ESPN, I'm Bill Knack.
So as that video pointed out pretty clearly, he didn't really care about any normal standards or normal rules. He was going to make sure he was going as far as he could to make sure his point came across. Now in the video, he said that Michael Jordan was, they said John Wooden said that Michael Jordan was his best learner, but who y'all think his best player was? Not his best player, but his favorite player. That's gonna be hard. And nobody's gonna get it. It was Rasheed Wallace. I think that's hilarious because I used to love watching Rasheed Wallace when I was younger, so he was a pretty fun guy to watch. Now, to D. Smith values, as I said, he was a teacher, he was a mentor, he was a man of integrity, he was a leader of men, and he always wanted to make sure that his players knew that it was more to life than just playing basketball. Some of his leadership qualities was teamwork, patience, academics, poise, loyalty, meticulousness, discipline, and humility. His teams were known as passing. He was the one kind of partly responsible for the implementation of the shot clock in the college, because he was going to start that four-corner passing just to stall time and stuff like that. He was also one of the first people to make sure when you do an assist that the guy that makes the basket, he always points back. You always see that. That's supposedly from Dean Smith. Another thing he started was when a guy comes up and he gets substituted, you come and everybody stands up, give him high fives. He was one of the first ones to do that. One of his main qualities though was his poisoness in his time towards the end of the game, when everybody else was nervous and rambling. Even in the game, before they were down one, and as you saw, he just calmly said, "I'd rather be us than be them," because we have the opportunity to actually affect the game. His top 10 principles in his book called The Carolina Way was caring, commitment, servant leadership, confidence building, team building, senior leadership, discipline, class, priorities, and what do you emphasize? Going to senior leadership, he was one of the main people. He definitely wouldn't like the one and done that's going on today in college basketball. He wanted to fight. He tried to get his school and the NCAA as a whole, eventually, to not even let freshmen be eligible to play his first year. He wanted them to just focus on schools. He thought that would help in recruiting. They would just get more serious students that were actually just there to learn and play basketball instead of just basketball players. Some of his accomplishments, which could go on for days. I think the one he'd probably be most proud about, though, is his overall 96.6 graduation rate. He had 879 total wins, just one losing season, which was his first season. He had a 77% win-loss ratio. He had 13 ACC tournament championships, 65 NCAA tournament wins, 9-time ACC Coach of the Year, 4-time overall Coach of the Year, 11 Final Fours, 2 NCAA championships, and 1 Olympic gold medal. Some more accomplishments: he had 30 All-Americans, he had 21 first-round draft picks, he had 51 total NBA players, and these are his Hall of Fame years on the right. North Carolina Sports Hall of Fame in 1981, the Basketball Hall of Fame in 1983, Kansas Sports Hall of Fame in 1996. They even put him in there just because he was born there. And College Basketball Hall of Fame in 2006, and he got the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2013. And here's a list of notable players. So you got Michael Jordan, Bob McAdoo, James Worthy, Sam Perkins. Those are all on the team. Bob McAdoo, all on the same team. Larry Brown and George Karl, Phil Ford, who was their leading scorer for North Carolina until Tyler Hansbrough took that. Mitch Kupchak, the GM for the Lakers, Rick Fox, Kenny Smith, J.R. Reed, Vince Carter, Jerry Stackhouse, and Rasheed Wallace, the last two were also on his last team and on the same team together. Some of the coaches, Larry Brown and George Karl and Billy Cunningham, actually, they all played for him and coached under him when they came out. And then Roy Williams coached under him for 10 years. And so these are just some quotes from him. John Wooden said, "Dean is the best teacher of basketball that I observed." He takes as much pride in the doctors and lawyers he coached as he does in the All-Stars. Roy Williams, he has the greatest. Yeah, he was the greatest if there ever was on the court, but far better off the court with people. His concern for people will be the legacy I remember the most. And Mike Krzyzewski, I can never say his name, he called Coach K. I can think of a time I can't think of a time I've ever heard him blame or degrade one of his players, and in return his kids are fiercely loyal to him. And then that's Charlie Scott describing a situation where somebody said a racial slur to him, and Coach Smith was about to get angry, and he was like trying to run after him, and people were trying to hold him back. And he said that was one of the only time he ever saw him get angry. It was just a point to how poised he was in public. And any questions?